Hi, everyone. Good morning. Today, we're joined by Dr. Stenehjem to give a quick update on vaccines for COVID-19 and what's been happening since Friday. On Friday, we discussed that there was a couple new vaccines potentially coming out and that we didn't have enough data yet to speak about them, but there was reports on Friday that kind of gave us an overview of a couple of different vaccines, so we will be diving into those. Before we get started, though, I'm just going to give a quick update on some case counts as well. The total in the state of Utah is 346,624, and our hospitalization total is at 13,468. Our death rate total is at 1,665, and the number of vaccines we've given so far are 210,692. Eddie, is there anything you wanted to mention to us around case counts or trends that you've seen since the last time we spoke on Friday?
No, I mean, last time we spoke, we talked about decreasing case counts, decreasing test positivity, decreasing hospitalizations, and we've seen that same trend continue over the weekend. On Sunday, we reported one of the lowest numbers in cases we've had in quite some time. If we look at our hospitalization data, whether it be within Intermountain or the statewide data set, we're starting to see this nice decline in hospitalizations that have kind of started about 10 days ago and really have started to really trend down. And so it looks like we're headed in the right direction, especially since we're having vaccine administration go up. We hit 16,000 vaccines administered in one day based on the state data. When 310,000 people being vaccinated, that's just, terrific. So from the epidemiology standpoint, we're moving in the right direction, and we just need to make sure that we keep doing what we're doing to make sure that these cases continue to decline, our hospitalizations continue to decline, and our deaths continue to decline. But we're on a good track right now, as long as people continue to mask, limit their contacts, and don't gather in large groups.
That's great to hear. And I want to just jump into the two vaccines that have come out in the news since Friday. There's the Novavex and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. There's some data released around those. I want to start with you explaining the differences between those two vaccines and the Pfizer and Moderna ones, which are mRNA vaccines.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny, last time we spoke, there was a question about, is there any data on vaccines and their ability to protect disease from variants? And we said, no, we're not going to have data on that for a while. And literally an hour after the Facebook Live, Novavex has a press release about their study. And then this weekend, Johnson & Johnson released a press release about their study. And so the two vaccines that we've have new data on are Novavax and J&J. And that adds to this now growing literature of vaccines. So let's first take the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is not an mRNA vaccine like Pfizer and Moderna is. It's a mouthful. It's called a non-replicating adenoviral vector vaccine. Okay, so that's a different vaccine platform altogether. What it does is it takes a virus that is generally a common cold virus, and they alter the makeup of that virus, where it essentially just delivers the DNA needed to make the spike protein. It doesn't replicate in our body, but it is able to deliver that bit of DNA into our host cells, which then can make the spike protein. So this is an adenoviral vector vaccine. J&J has used the same platform to make an Ebola vaccine that's been effective, and it's on that same platform that they're using. So they reported out top line data saying it was 66% effective in their study. But one of the key things we have to keep in mind is ask yourself, effective against what? So in the mRNA trials, Pfizer and Moderna trial, they looked at any symptomatic PCR positive or test positive COVID infection. So you can have incredibly mild disease, or you can have severe disease. It counted the same in those two vaccine trials. In this trial, they looked for moderate to severe disease as their primary outcome. They didn't look at that mild disease. They looked at moderate to severe and showed a 66% effectiveness against moderate or severe disease in that. And they are actually on 3 different continents. They did US, Central and South America, and then in Africa as well. And the aggregated sum was 66% effective, but it varied between 50% in South Africa to 72% in the US. And so there's some variability there. What I think is most striking about this is that when they looked at 49 days out from their vaccine, that it had 100% efficacy against preventing hospitalization or death. Okay, and so yes, people say, oh, 66%, that's not good. That's not as good as the 95% mRNA vaccine. It's different. This, though, is essentially reporting out exceptional protection against severe disease, particularly hospitalization and death, especially as you're getting out to like day 49 from vaccine. So this does stand to be a very good vaccine for the global population. The other two really important things about this particular vaccine product is that it's only one dose. And so as opposed to Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, and Novavax, this is just one dose, and it doesn't require ultra cold temperatures. Okay, so it requires a standard, what we call cold chain. And so it requires essentially refrigeration, and it can maintain in refrigeration over a month. And so the practicalities of this vaccine is tremendous in the setting that it's one dose, doesn't require ultra cold temperature, and it really prevents severe disease in the studies so far done in North America, South America, and then South Africa. And so looks to be a very good vaccine. They're looking to be submitting to the US FDA coming here in February. And the other part that we've heard from J&J is that they're able to really ramp up manufacturing, where they could potentially talk about making 1 billion doses over the next year, which is just, you know, a great addition to our vaccine arsenal for this. The other thing we should add is that even in South Africa, where the majority of infections were due to this new variant, this B1351 variant, this vaccine prevented severe disease. Okay, so it absolutely looks good and promising in preventing severe disease in that South African variant, which is, you know, really welcome news.
Before we get to the Novavax, I just have a quick question about the differences. You mentioned that this vaccine is kind of similar to a cold scenario with like, an Ebola was kind of structured around this versus the mRNA. I know a big question people are going to ask us is if this changes your DNA at all. Is there anything about the vaccine that can interfere with your DNA system at all?
No, none that has been reported out that we've seen any reports of. You know, this is the equivalent of how you get your cells to make a protein that stimulates an immune response. Okay, so it's as opposed to the Pfizer Moderna, where we give you mRNA, then it just generates a sequence. This is just a different modality where we're using this adenoviral vector to get that sequence into your cells to make that protein. And so it really is just another method to get our cells to make the appropriate protein to generate an immune response.
And has there been any adverse side effects reported with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine at all? How are people doing with just the one dose comparative to maybe side effects for the 2-dose one?
Yeah, so we don't have the full published article on this J&J trial. It was just a press release, so we're getting pretty high level data. They do address it, and they talk about their data safety monitoring board showing that there's no signal for any severe side effects. 9% of the people that received the vaccine had a fever, but only like 0.2% had a high fever. And so it actually looks to be less of a side effect profile as compared to the second dose of the Moderna or Pfizer. But again, we only have a snippet of the data. More of that will come once we see the full article that's released, hopefully in either a preprint server or published in the next few weeks to a month.
Another question we just got was if this vaccine is a live virus.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So there's some really subtleties to this. This is a non-replicating virus. And so this construct, once given, it can infect those cells to deliver the product, but then it can't replicate and form an infection. And so this is not a vector that is a live functional virus. This essentially delivers the message into your cells, and then it stops. It doesn't have the capabilities in the construct of the virus to replicate at all. And so it's a non-replicating adenoviral vector.
And another question around that too, do we know anything about the coverage length between these two vaccines compared to the Pfizer and Moderna one?
We don't know any of that because remember, all of these vaccines get FDA approval has to have a median time of 2 months of follow-up, because that 2 months of follow-up is really where you're going to see side effects from vaccines. And so we don't have any idea in terms of the duration of immunity in Pfizer, Moderna, or in the J&J or Novavax. It's just too early to determine that. That's really where these vaccine effectiveness studies come into play, as opposed to vaccine efficacy studies. And so we certainly don't know and won't know for quite a bit of time.
One more question around that too. Somebody just mentioned that the 90-day wait period between if you had COVID and getting the vaccine kind of scares them a bit because of the fact that there's these new variants. Do we know anything about the natural immunity of the new variants and whether those have the same projected 90-day length as the original variant or original virus?
Yeah, so what we can say is, now in the UK, the B117 variant is their predominant viral variant or viral, pathogen. In the UK, we're not seeing repeated infections. Okay, and so what that tells us is that the immune response that you generate from your primary infection prevents you from this B117 variant. And so that we're feeling pretty comfortable about, because you're just not seeing hordes of reinfection in the UK where B117 is circulating. Okay, so that's, just kind of epidemiologically speaking, evidence that it is protective, or prior infection is protective over this B117 variant or the UK variant. In South Africa, we're still getting details. There's some data coming out of, these trials that included South African people, particularly in the Novavax phase 2B trial, that potentially the South African variant wouldn't be, you're not immune to that if you've been previously infected with what we call the wild type variant. But that's really early data to really understand whether or not that's truly the case. And we also don't have significant data to suggest that South African variant is here in the US.
Let's move on to the Novavex vaccine. Can you give us an update on what's been released around how effective that vaccine is as well?
Yeah, so the Novavex vaccine, again, it's a different vaccine platform as compared to the J&J, Moderna, and Pfizer. This is a protein-based vaccine. So you could hear this being called a recombinant protein vaccine or a subunit vaccine. What this is it takes the protein, the actual spike protein that is actually developed and made in insect cells. You take that protein and you add what's called an adjuvant to it, which stimulates the immune system, and then use that as your vaccine. So as opposed to the other ones, which makes your cells make this protein, this is you're actually just giving the protein with what's called an adjuvant, which stimulates immune response to generate this immune response to the protein you just gave. And so there's plenty of examples of protein-based vaccines. So the hepatitis B vaccine, for example, is a recombinant protein-based vaccine. Diphtheria and tetanus takes the protein or the toxin in those infections, which is a protein, and gives that, and that generates an immune response. So this is a platform that people are used to. They've received vaccines from this, and it's different than compared to J&J, Moderna, and Pfizer. And so this is a protein-based vaccine. The data they released was their phase 3 trial data from the UK, which had about 15,000 participants. And in this study, like Moderna and Pfizer, they're looking at anybody who's symptomatic with COVID-19. So if you have mild, moderate, or severe symptoms, it didn't really matter. And they found an 89.3% efficacy against any symptomatic COVID-19, which is really pretty good. They had 56 cases in the placebo group, 6 cases in the active group, and it was at a time when the B117 variant was widespread in the UK, and it certainly looked to offer coverage for that. That's essentially where that trial data ended. We don't know really anything more than that in terms of its effect on severe disease. We do know that there wasn't any severe cases in the 6 people that got infected that had received the active vaccine. So presumably it's quite good, but we just don't have any data on it yet. But they're reporting 89.3% efficacy after 7 days after their second shot. And so good, really promising data to suggest that this Novavax vaccine covers the B.1.1.7 variant and is very effective just in general in preventing any kind of symptomatic COVID-19. Again, it has to be refrigerated. It doesn't need these ultra cold temperatures, but it does require 2 doses. And so really good, welcome news of another vaccine that looks to be quite effective in preventing symptomatic COVID-19.
Do we have any ideas when those 2 vaccines will be available in the US?
I don't have any data in terms of Novavax. It probably is data, I'm just not aware of it. J&J in their press release said they'd be going to the FDA to ask for an emergency use authorization the first part of February, and then they have shipments ready to go immediately thereafter. It doesn't sound like they have a huge stockpile of vaccine ready to go. There was a report out this morning that said maybe 10 million doses, but they certainly can ramp up their production in the weeks and months that follow. But it does sound like they hope by mid to end of February to be able to be shipping vaccine after an EUA. And we'll have to really think hard and coordinate with the Utah Department of Health. Is how do they want to differentially use the Johnson & Johnson vaccine versus the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, knowing that there are differences in the dosing schedule, the refrigeration requirements, and the population that are going to receive them.
That was kind of going to be my next question. If I'm the general public or I'm available to get the vaccine next, and say Johnson & Johnson is available in this scenario, are there going to be choices for people or options for people if you do live in, say, Salt Lake City, where you're not having to worry about the rural aspect?
I think it's going to be a really good question that will defer to the Utah Department of Health in terms of how they want to set that up. I don't think that the access to the J&J vaccine is going to be super significant. It sounds like they don't have initially a lot of doses. So I think most likely Pfizer and Moderna are going to be continuing to be our main vaccines here in Utah for the time being. We'll have to see how much of the J&J vaccine is allocated to Utah. And it's a potential that the U.S. government may change allocation strategies with J&J to target specific populations. We just don't know. So we're going to have to wait and see what advice we get from the Vaccine Advisory Council, from the CDC, and also from the Utah Department of Health.
Last question for you is around the new variants. I just wanted to kind of get an update if we've learned anything about them in the US, and if we're needing to take any sort of extra precautions for ourselves now that we've kind of seen them around. I know LA County has experienced a lot of the new variants, but do we need to be worried at all about them?
I mean, viruses mutate. So we expected variants to come, and we're certainly identifying them. We've only seen 2 cases of the UK variant here in the US. That's based on what Angela Dunn said last week. And Utah is sequencing quite a few of the viral isolates. And so we are, fortunately in a position where the Utah Public Health Lab is doing a lot of sequencing. So if it was a predominant mode of infection here in Utah, I think we'd know about it at this point because of the amount that they're sequencing. It really highlights the fact that we just need to maintain vigilant on our public health practices. And so it's wear a good mask, continue to do your social isolation, and really drop down that the viral burden in our communities. There's talk about double mask, single mask. Our focus needs to be wearing a good, effective mask and wearing it appropriately. And so I think that really should be a continued focus of ours, is to maintain those public health measures as we move through the winter and we really assess the effect of these variants, and as we get our vaccination coverage up.
2 follow-up questions for you really quick on that. So one, are we worried about any sort of spring surge with the variants, especially if people are coming into the state of Utah? I know that you said, Andrea Dunn mentioned we don't have a lot of cases yet, but what about the people who are traveling here? I know it's ski season. We got lots of snow this past weekend, and there are people coming into town from other states. Is that something that could potentially cause a surge here?
Yeah, I mean, this is the way that viruses spread, right? I mean, we saw this as a perfect example as the coronavirus was taking off across the globe. And that's how it came here in Utah was through travel, through people coming back from travel or coming to Utah. We saw this, pandemic or epidemic in Utah really start in Summit County with, travelers for the ski season. And so, yeah, it's definitely a concern of ours to be really monitoring this current situation with the viral variants. It just emphasizes the fact that we need to get vaccines out, because it looks like vaccines are protective against these variants. And it's just a race against vaccine administration and the variants. And so if we can get vaccines out ASAP and get more and more of our communities protected, not just Utah communities, but our US and global communities, the less we're going to have to worry about this transmission pattern.
Well, Dr. Stenehjem, thank you so much for that update. Is there anything else you wanted to mention to us that we should be aware of before we speak next time?
No, I mean, I think so far, all of these vaccines appear to be safe and effective, and that is incredibly welcome news. We haven't seen, very significant vaccine failures. The side effect profiles of these vaccines, whether it be the protein-based vaccines, the adenoviral vector, or the RNAs, they look incredibly safe. And so when you start seeing safety profiles across the board be very, very consistent, you get, very comfortable with these, and these look to be safe and effective vaccines. So we just encourage the public, when it's your time, when a vaccine is available to you, get it and protect yourself and your communities.
Well, thank you so much. And if anyone watching wants some more information about the vaccines, they can go to the state's website, coronavirus.utah.gov/vaccine, or we also have an Intermountain vaccine webpage that you can visit as well. I will throw the link into the Facebook Live after we are done. If you have any questions around testing, you can also go to intermountain.com/COVID testing and fill out a brief survey to see if you qualify, which will then allow you to schedule an appointment arrival time for that as well. Dr. Stenehjem, thanks for joining us, and we'll speak to you later.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks.